Michael Price's avatar. He's currently helping clients manage their GSA and VA contracts, and he reads every comment. Welcome, I'm Michael Price, your host.
Today is June 26th, and I'm Nancy, your co-host.
As a disabled Vietnam veteran, this one hits home with me.
Ouch, let's get started.
So, have you ever wondered what it actually takes to make a massive government bureaucracy just, back down?
Well, back down isn't exactly the phrase most people associate with the government.
Right. I mean, usually you think of these places as unyielding. But today we are taking a deep dive into the hidden, unspoken rules within the VA disability system.
Yeah, it's a really compelling premise because when you picture the VA, you tend to see this absolute unyielding monolith.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
I just picture an endless, windowless warehouse of manila folders, just miles of paperwork.
Exactly. You feed your paperwork into the machine and whatever judgment comes out is final. But when you actually examine the underlying legal architecture, you realize the machine has strict limitations.
And that is exactly what we're mapping out for you today. We've got a stack of detailed legal notes on the Code of Federal Regulations, and we're pairing that with, frankly, an incredibly illuminating perspective from Dr. Marshall Barr.
Right, and Dr. Barr brings us really rare combination of credentials to the table.
Yeah, he's a former Army Ranger, right?
Yeah. 1st Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment. He was a Special Operations Combat Medic. He's a disabled veteran himself. And, well, perhaps most importantly for our discussion, he is a former CNP examiner.
Which is compensation and pension for those who don't know.
Exactly. So he was the guy with the clipboard. He knows exactly how the adjudicators inside the VA evaluate these files.
Knowing his background just completely grounds this whole thing. So our mission for this deep dives is to cut through all that bureaucratic noise. We're going to unpack the legal threshold of what the VA calls sustained improvement, and we'll explore 5 specific medical conditions that are practically bulletproof against rating reductions.
And really the overarching theme here is that friction between human biology and rigid bureaucracy.
Yeah.
The human body is organic, right? It has good days and bad days, but the law requires categorical certainty.
Wants a checkbox.
Exactly. Trying to force a fluctuating human life into a static legal checkbox that's where the system begins to fracture.
Okay, let's unpack this because before we can talk about the specific conditions, we really need to understand the battlefield here.
For sure.
In his video, Dr. Barr drops this statistic that genuinely made me rewind, make sure I heard him correctly.
The failure rate.
Yes. He claims that when the VA proposes a rating reduction and the veteran actually appeals it, the VA loses over 50% of the time. And for certain conditions, they fail 70 to 90% of the time. Wait. The federal government just gives up.
I know. It sounds totally counterintuitive. We always assume the House wins.
It does.
But the VA's high failure rate here, it isn't due to a lack of resources. It's because of the specific regulatory handcuffs they wear.
Right.
The linchpin of this entire framework is found in Title 38 of the Code of Federal Regulations.
Correct.
We are talking about the 5-year rule.
The 5-year shield.
Yes, the shield. If a veteran has held a specific disability rating continuously for 5 years, that rating is granted a massive legal protection.
But they can't just take it away because some new doctor is having a bad day.
Yeah. Legally, they can't. The VA cannot reduce it simply because a new examiner has a different opinion. To legally reduce a protected rating, the VA must definitively prove that the veteran's condition has shown sustained improvement.
But wait, what does sustained actually mean in a medical context? Like, if a veteran walks into an exam and says, hey, I started taking new vitamin and I had a really great morning today. The VA can't just jump on that, can they?
Legally, no. And the sources rely really heavily on this concept of a snapshot in time.
A snapshot?
Yeah, a standard CNP exam lasts maybe 30 to 60 minutes?
If that.
Right. Clinically speaking, a 60-minute exam is just a single frame in a feature-length film of someone's life.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
A person with a severe chronic illness might have a good hour just because, the barometric pressure shifted or their medication peaked perfectly at that exact moment.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So the VA cannot legally use that single isolated snapshot to declare that a chronic condition has permanently reversed course.
That shifts the dynamic so dramatically.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if we think about this process like a criminal trial.
Okay, I like that analogy.
Right, so when a veteran first files a disability claim, they are basically the prosecutor. They have to build the whole case.
Exactly.
They bring their service records, their medical files, and they usually need a nexus letter, which, for those who don't know, is an official letter from a doctor that forms a bridge. a nexus connecting their current medical problem directly back to their military service.
Right. The veteran has the complete burden of proof at that stage. They have to prove the injury exists and is service-connected beyond a reasonable doubt.
But once that 5-year mark hits,
The whole courtroom flips.
exactly, the veteran is no longer the prosecutor. Suddenly, the VA becomes the prosecutor. The veteran doesn't have to prove they're still sick.
Yeah.
The VA has to bring overwhelming, undeniable evidence to prove the veteran is functionally cured.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, you can see why the VA loses 90% of these reduction attempts.
Because it's impossible to prove.
Exactly. Think about chronic degenerative conditions. How does a government lawyer prove that someone permanently recovered from an illness that medical science says is incurable?
Right, it's a biological impossibility.
It is. Dr. Barr points out that the administrative burden to prove sustained improvement on a progressive condition is so impossibly high. A lot of examiners they don't even try.
Wow, but okay, if the government has to definitively prove you got better with hard evidence, what happens when the injury is something they can't even see?
Right, the invisible scars.
Exactly. Let's move into the first of the bulletproof conditions, severe psychological trauma, specifically PTSD rated at 70% or higher.
Well, at a 70 or 100% rating, a veteran is dealing with severe chronic mental health impairment.
Really heavy stuff.
Yeah, we're talking about extensive documentation of extreme hypervigilance, panic attacks, an inability to maintain relationships, severe occupational impairment, and, often suicidal ideation.
And the most basic truth about trauma is that it fluctuates. You don't just have one bad day, you have a decent week, and then it's followed by a terrible month. A veteran could easily sit in a quiet, trigger-free exam room for 45 minutes and appear totally calm, articulate, and completely fine.
But an examiner observing 45 minutes of calm does not negate the reality of PTSD. Severe trauma literally changes the nervous system.
Yeah.
A veteran might develop better coping mechanisms through intense therapy or, use medication to blunt the edges of a panic attack, but the underlying psychological wound is still there.
And Dr. Barr brings up an angle here that I found really striking, and it actually has nothing to do with medicine.
Oh, the liability aspect.
Yes, it's about cold institutional liability.
LI.
Let's say a VA rater decides to cut a veteran's 70% PTSD rating based on just one calm exam. They pull away that financial safety net, and the veteran subsequently spirals into a severe crisis or, worse, harms themselves.
The legal and public relations liability the VA takes on in that scenario is astronomical. Bureaucracies, above all else, exist to minimize institutional risk.
So it's not just that they can't prove you're better, it's that they are terrified of being wrong.
Precisely. To even attempt a reduction on severe PTSD, the VA demands a mountainous paper trail.
What kind of paper trail?
They would need years of stable treatment records, a long-term absence of any mental health crises, and a documented sustained return to full social and occupational functioning.
Which is incredibly rare.
Exactly. Without that undeniable proof of long-term stability, reducing a severe PTSD rating is simply an unacceptable risk for the VA.
That makes total sense. It's institutional self-preservation.
Yep.
Now, staying inside the brain, but shifting from a psychological injury to a physical one, let's talk about traumatic brain injury, or TBI.
Oh, Dr. Barr was emphatic about this.
He really was. He pointed out a very basic biological fact. A damaged brain does not regenerate tissue.
No, it doesn't. Like if you snap your collarbone, the bone knits back together, right?
Yeah.
But if physical trauma shears the neural pathways in your brain, that tissue is just gone.
And that biological permanence forms the foundation of the shield. But the legal protection for a TBI is actually much deeper than that.
Mm-hmm.
And it comes down to how the VA is legally required to evaluate it.
Okay.
A TBI is not rated based on a single symptom. The VA evaluates it across multiple facets.
Yeah, the all facets rule.
Right. They measure memory, mood, concentration, executive function, spatial orientation, motor function. It's a holistic evaluation.
Wow, okay.
So to legally prove sustained improvement and reduce the overall TBI rating, the VA cannot just show that one isolated area got a little bit better. They have to prove sustained improvement across all of those facets.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate for a second here.
Go for it.
Suppose a veteran with a severe TBI starts a cutting-edge medication, right? And it works brilliantly for their mood. They are demonstrably happier, less irritable, sleeping better.
Wouldn't the VA examiner jump on that and say, look, your mood improved, so we're lowering your TBI rating?
It's a really common fear, but under the regulations, that argument actually fails.
Really?
Yeah, the sources clarify the difference between symptom management and biological healing.
How so?
Well, if a medication increases serotonin and improves the veteran's mood, that is successful symptom management, but that pill did not rebuild the shared neural pathways in the frontal lobe.
Right, the physical damage hasn't reversed.
Exactly. So while their mood is better, their short term memory might still be shattered, their spatial orientation might still be compromised.
They might not be able to concentrate for more than 10 minutes.
Right, because those other facets remain impaired, the legal standard to reduce the entire TBI rating just hasn't been met.
That is such a crucial distinction for you to keep in mind. Symptom management is not a biological cure.
No, it's not.
Okay, so if the brain is this permanent protected epicenter, what happens when we trace those misfiring signals down into the rest of the body?
We move from conditions the VA evaluates holistically, right, across all facets, to a condition they evaluate with cold, hard numbers.
Let's look at radiculopathy,
Okay, so radiculopathy is essentially nerve damage originating in the spine.
like a pinched nerve.
Basically, it usually happens in the cervical spine, which is the neck, or the lumbar spine in the lower back. When a nerve root is compressed or damaged, you get pain, numbness, tingling, or weakness radiating down the arms or legs.
But how do you prove that to the VA? I mean, you can't just walk in and say, hey, my leg feels tingly today, right? They'd want actual proof.
And that is exactly why Dr. Barr calls radiculopathy bulletproof. It provides objective proof.
Okay,
Unlike pain, which is purely subjective, nerve dysfunction can be definitively measured using diagnostic testing, primarily through an EMG.
okay, wait, stop right there. What actually is an EMG and how does it prove anything?
So an EMG, or electromyography, involves inserting tiny needle electrodes into the muscle and using electrical currents to measure the exact speed and strength of the signals traveling down a nerve. Yeah, it's not fun, but think of a nerve like a fiber optic cable or a garden hose. If a spinal disc is crushing that hose, the water pressure drops.
Right.
An EMG measures that drop in electrical pressure. It provides raw numerical data showing exactly how much the nerve is failing to fire.
Wow. So it's just math?
It was pure math. And here's the medical reality. Peripheral nerves that have been chronically compressed do not spontaneously heal themselves. The internal fibers die.
Even if you get surgery?
Even then, if a veteran gets spinal surgery to remove the pressure, the nerve itself might never fully recover.
So if a veteran had an EMG, say 5 years ago, that showed a 30% loss of signal in their leg, and they get tested again today.
Those numbers aren't going to magically look better.
Exactly.
The numbers on an EMG don't lie, and they certainly don't change just because the veteran happens to be having a relatively low pain day.
That makes sense.
If the objective diagnostic data remains consistent over decades, the VA has zero medical basis to claim the nerve magically repaired itself.
Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting, because if objective numerical data is the ultimate shield, what happens to people with conditions that absolutely cannot be measured?
Right, the other extreme.
We are pivoting to the exact opposite end of the spectrum here, pure subjectivity. The next protected condition is chronic migraines, rated at 50%.
Yes.
You can't see a migraine on an MRI. You can't hook someone up to an EMG and measure a headache.
You can't, because a true migraine isn't just a headache. It is a massive wave of altered brain activity. It's blood vessel constriction, sensory overload. It's a systemic neurological event.
Yeah.
And the protection for this condition comes down to the very intense specific language the VA uses in their rating criteria.
Right, the notes say that to hold a 50% rating, the migraine attacks must be very frequent, completely prostrating, and cause severe economic inadaptability.
Those are heavy terms.
Prostrating is such an old school word, but it literally means you are incapacitated. You are physically forced to lie down in a dark, silent room and just wait for the systemic shutdown to pass.
And economic inadaptability means these unpredictable neurological shutdowns are actively sabotaging your ability to hold down a job and make a living.
I like to think of migraines like earthquakes.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Right, because they are completely unpredictable, violent events. You might go 3 weeks without feeling a tremor, totally fine. And then suddenly, boom, you get hit with 3 massive prostrating earthquakes in a single week. Your life is entirely derailed.
Right.
And because a C&P examiner cannot put a stethoscope to your head and, measure the severity of an earthquake, your personal migraine log becomes the seismograph.
What's fascinating here is how the total lack of objective testing actually empowers the veteran, provided they are meticulous.
Meticulous is the key word.
It places a massive premium on consistent subjective reporting. The veteran's own historical record is the only tool that exists to track the condition.
So keeping a log isn't just like good practice, it is your literal legal defense.
Precisely. If a veteran maintains a detailed migraine log, tracking the dates, the duration, the severity, the days of work missed.
All the details.
Right, and if that history of prostrating attacks remains stable over 5 years, that subjective log transforms into hard evidence.
Wow.
The VA knows these vascular patterns rarely resolve on their own. If the veteran's history is thoroughly documented and consistent, the VA cannot invent a spontaneous recovery out of thin air.
Document, document, document.
Always.
Which brings us to the final and frankly the trickiest part of our deep dive. We've covered the brain, the nerves, and episodic migraines, but what about conditions that are actively, visibly getting worse over time?
The degenerative ones.
Yes. Paradoxically, this is where veterans are in the most danger of accidentally losing their ratings.
You're referring to degenerative spine conditions, things like degenerative disc disease, spinal arthritis, or spinal stenosis. The operative word there is degenerative.
Right, by definition, they degrade. If I take an MRI of my arthritic spine today and another one in 5 years, the discs are going to be bulging more, the bone spurs will be larger. It will visually look worse.
It definitely will.
So if the VA has to prove I got better, and my MRI proves I got worse, how could I possibly lose my rating?
Because of a crucial and honestly a deeply misunderstood loophole in the regulations.
Okay, hit me.
When the VA evaluates a degenerative spine condition, they are not actually rating the physical damage shown on the MRI image.
Wait, explain that. What are they rating?
They are rating the functional limitation caused by that damage.
Oh.
The VA wants to know your range of motion. How far can you bend forward? How long can you stand? It's about your physical capability on a daily basis.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah, so even if your MRI looks like a complete train wreck, if you walk into an exam room, stand up straight and say, I'm doing pretty good today, doc.
No way.
The VA can legally use your subjective report of functional improvement to lower your rating.
That is a terrifying trap. It actively punishes veterans for putting on a brave face.
It really does.
Dr. Barr's advice here is incredibly tactical. You cannot use vague generalities like, my back is sore. You have to speak the language of functional limitations.
Yes.
The sources give us exact phrases to use. Don't say, it hurts. Say, I physically cannot stand for more than 10 minutes without severe pain shooting down my leg.
Exactly.
Say, I cannot bend over to pick up my grandkids, or I am forced to lie down 3 times a day just to cope with the spasms.
Those highly specific functional descriptions are what cement your rating. Degenerative spine conditions are notoriously prone to flare-ups, right?
Oh yeah, bad weather, sleeping wrong.
Exactly, your pain levels will swing wildly. So if you happen to be having a relatively low pain day during your C&T exam and you minimize your daily struggle because you just want to seem tough,
you're handing them the evidence.
Yes, you are handing the VA documented proof that your functional capacity has improved.
Dr. Barr shared an incredible story that ties this entire deep dive together.
Oh, the Xterra Health story.
Yes. So after he left the VA, he started a company called Xterra Health to help veterans navigate this exact system, and he worked with a veteran who was absolutely terrified.
Understandably so.
Right. This man had a family to support, and he relied on a 70% disability rating he had held for 15 years. And get this, his conditions: PTSD, degenerative disc disease, radiculopathy in both legs, and chronic migraines.
Okay. He essentially held a royal flush of protected conditions.
Yes, but he didn't know it.
Of course not.
He got a letter in the mail saying the VA was conducting a review exam, and he panicked. He thought the government was going to just take away his livelihood.
Yeah, that letter is a nightmare for a lot of people.
So Dr. Barr sat him down and explained the 5-year shield. He had 4 of the most heavily protected conditions in the entire system.
And Dr. Barr's prep, it wasn't about exaggerating or lying.
Right, not at all. It was about radical honesty. He told the veteran to go into that exam, describe his functional limitations with brutal accuracy, and whatever he did, do not minimize the reality of his worst days just because he was sitting in front of a doctor.
And the outcome?
Total victory.
Nice.
No reduction. His ratings were completely confirmed and held because the granular evidence supported him and the VA couldn't conjure sustained improvement out of thin air.
That is incredible.
It is. So what does this all mean? I mean, when you look at the entire landscape we've mapped out today, it tells us something vital about how massive bureaucracies operate.
Definitely.
The system doesn't just want a doctor's note saying you have an injury. It demands to know exactly how that injury creates friction in your daily life.
That is the crux of it. The bureaucracy cannot scan your brain for pain, but it can measure economic impact and functional loss.
Which means for you listening, whether you are battling the VA disability system, fighting a massive health insurance claim, or just dealing with any giant medical bureaucracy,
The paper trail.
yes, your absolute best weapon is a relentless, honest, and long-term paper trail. You have to document your worst days so they actually count. Consistency over years will always defeat a single good day in an exam room.
This raises an important question, though, doesn't it?
Oh, what's that?
When we look closely at this entire apparatus, a system that relies so heavily on phrases like economic inadaptability and functional limitation, it reveals something quite profound about how modern society views disability.
How do you mean?
Well, it implies that in the eyes of the state, a disability isn't purely defined by biological trauma or the physical shearing of brain tissue. It is largely defined by a person's friction with a capitalist economy.
Wow. Yeah.
It leaves us to ponder, right?
Yeah.
In these massive administrative systems, are we actually measuring human health, or are we simply measuring a human's capacity for productivity?
That is a deeply provocative thought, and honestly, it's going to stick with me. It's not just about the MRI showing the broken spine. It's about whether that broken spine stops you from clocking in. It's a heavy realization, but well, it is the reality of the paper trail. So keep documenting, keep questioning the rules of the game, and keep digging deeper into the systems that govern our lives. We'll see you next time.
If you found this video helpful, please consider donating to helpallvets.org. Thank you.
A special thank you to MarketUS.com for furnishing us this information. You can reach them at MarketUS.com or call them at 954-636-3232. Before we go, this deep dive was created by the MarketUS.com team. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. It's right below the subscribe link.